Hey, welcome. Welcome all of you. Come on in. Welcome to Mr. Jeff's house. So, we're going to do a virtual class from my home. And we're going to repeat some of the rituals that you guys all know and love. And the first one is our opening words. Come into the circle of love and friendship. Come into the community of justice and goodness. Come and you shall know peace and joy. And that's what I'm hoping to bring you a little bit today. So, just like we do at class, let's light our chalice. And I know we actually light our chalice as we say those opening words. Going to read you a story today. Hope you enjoy it. It's one of my kids' favorites. I chose an Earth-centered story since next Saturday was going to be Trash Bash, where we're going to go out to the Islamic Center and clean up Bay Area Park and the bayou around it. That's not going to happen due to the call for social distancing. But you and your parents perhaps can go out and over this break clean up your yard, your neighborhood. There's my challenge to you. If you get a video or a picture of that, send it my way. Would brighten my day. So let's get ready for our story. Yes, it's the chimes. Go on, take a deep breath in. Exhale, another deep breath. Close those eyes and tell me when you can no longer hear the chimes ring. All right, my hand's up. All right, well, come on in. And let's start our story. It's called The Rough-Faced Girl. And some of you may have heard this. If so, you haven't heard me read it. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great, huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, the moon, the stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam, there was said to live a very rich and powerful, supposedly handsome, invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said only the one who can see him can marry him. Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters, and the 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her, and in time, her hands became burnt and scarred, and her arms became rough and scarred as well, and her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her. "Ha! You're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. Now one day, these 2 older sisters went to their father, and they said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things, and dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village, and all the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now as they walked hauntedly through the village. And at last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "Well, if you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" Of course we've seen him, they insisted. Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh, yes. Anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being. All right, she said quietly. If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made of? And suddenly her voice was swift as lightning and strong as thunder. His bow, they whimpered, they stammered. His bow? We know. But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, what shall we say? Let's say it's the old oak tree, they said. Yeah, the old oak tree. No, said the sister of the invisible being. No, as she saw at once that they had lied. Tell me, she continued, if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made of? We know, cried the two sisters, but whispering feverishly, again they wondered, what shall we say? Let's say it's the green willow branch. No, said the sister when she heard. No, you've not seen my brother. Now go home. Just test us fairly, they exclaimed. You've seen him. Just don't ask us all these silly questions. All right, said the sister of the invisible being. Come with me. And she took them back to the great wigwam and set them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seats. And soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside, and they heard breathing. The two sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly, a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide, all through that night, they never saw the thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home, ashamed. Now, the next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father, and she said, Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some beautiful moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face. But her father sighed. Daughter, he said, I'm old, and I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells, and I have no buckskin dresses. And as for moccasins, all I have are my old, worn-out, cracked, and wretched pair from last year, and they're much too big. But she answered, whatever you can spare, I can use. And so he gave her those things. Then she found some dried reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace together. And she stripped birch bark from the dead tree, and she made a cap and a dress and leggings. And then, with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the pictures of the sun and the moon and the plants and trees and animals. And she went down to the lake shore, and she soaked those moccasins in the warm water until they grew soft. And then she molded them to her feet, but they were still too big, and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. And people looked at her as they came out of the wigwams, and they pointed and they say, look at that ugly girl, they laughed. Look at her strange clothes. Hey, go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage, and she did not back down, and she just kept walking right through the village. And as she walked on, she saw the great beauty of the earth and skies spread before her. And truly, she alone of all in the village saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. And at last, she came to the lake shore, just as the sun was sinking behind the hills and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the dark sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a very wise woman, and she looked at you. She didn't just see in your face or your hair or clothes. No, when she looked at you, she could look right into your eyes, and she could see all the way down into your heart. And she could tell if you had been a good, kind heart or if you had a cold, cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once, though her skin was scarred and her face burnt and her clothes strange, She had a beautiful, kind heart, and so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," the sister said proudly, gently now, "if you want to marry him, you must have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes." "All right then," said the sister. "If you have seen him, tell me, what's his bow made of?" The rough-faced girl said, "His bow? Why, it's the great curve of the rainbow." You see that? "Ah," exclaimed the sister in excitement. "Tell me, if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of his sled? Why, it's the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky." "Ah," cried the sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and set her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer, and the flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "Ah, at last we have been found out." Then, smiling kindly, he added, "Oh, my sister, but she is beautiful." And his sister said, "Yes, yes, she is." The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin roses and necklace of perfect shells. "Now, go bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." And so the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake, and suddenly all the scars vanished from her body, and her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful. Now the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Then, at last, the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married, and they lived together in great gladness and were never parted. Isn't that beautiful? So, some of you may have caught on. It's a familiar plot. Tell me, what story does that remind you of? It's pretty famous and movies have been made about. 1, 2, you are correct. You guys are a smart lot. Yes, Cinderella. And did you know that there were over 1,500 Cinderella version stories out there? So pretty fascinating. This is one of the earliest. So I thank you for coming and sitting in with me. So let us say our closing. As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return. And my wish for you guys is that you use and show your kind hearts inside along with your beautiful selves on the outside. And looking forward to seeing you again soon. Saying that bye now, Mr. Jeff, signing off.